Hello, friend. I want to tell you about the Passat B7 car. The 7th generation Passat is one of those interesting Volkswagen models that, if it were a human being, I would describe as devoid of identity. Supposedly the 7th generation, but in practice the 6th, after a serious facelift. It is a case similar to the VW Golf 6 or even the Passat B4, which were transitional models. The Passat B7 on the streets, and in sales advertisements, is clearly inferior in numbers to both its predecessor B6 and its successor B8. Is the VW Passat B7 better than its predecessor? It is right to say that this is a much modernized Passat B6. This is less visible in the body shape, it is more angular, and more in the style of the cockpit. It has practically the same external and internal dimensions, and the same is true of the chassis design, so objectively it is not a better car than its predecessor. A very characteristic element of the B7 generation are the clearly visible LED daytime running lights. However, a complete novelty, and an important change at that, was the equipment of the Passat for the first time with safety systems supporting the driver while driving. That is why this model required a thorough modernization. The list of equipment of better models includes, among others, dynamic high beam adjustment, lane change assistant, blind spot assistant, traffic sign recognition, and adaptive cruise control. There is also adaptive suspension, the ability to choose one of 3 driving modes and a sports suspension, harder and lowered by 15 millimeters. Engines in the VW Passat B7, cheated diesels and faulty petrol engines. While many of the predecessor's TDI engines struggled with serious failures, they were improved in the B7 model. The EA 189 family units have only common rail injection regardless of capacity. The 2.0 TDI marked CFFB and with 140 horsepower is equipped with an SCR system, which is supposed to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions. It was because of this technical solution that the VW group got into trouble with the exhaust scandal. The petrol engines of the Passat B7 are practically a whole bunch of problems, from the smallest unit 1.4 TSI to the largest 3.6 VR6. In between are the popular 1.8 TSI and 2.0 TSI, burdened with the defect of excessive oil consumption. The choice of the engine version of the Passat B7 can be reduced to a short one, 2.0 TDI. Which one? In practice, it doesn't matter. Although it would be better if it didn't have the SCR system, which causes problems not only in winter. The 170 and 177 horsepower versions drive great. The latter is newer, so basically the best. I suggest skipping the 1.6 TDI for 2 reasons. Delicate and expensive injectors, lasting just over 200,000 kilometers, and low power, not corresponding to the dimensions of the car. Of course, buying a Passat 2.0 TDI does not mean that the car will be 100% failure-free. You have to reckon with every fault typical of modern diesels, from the trivial, not very expensive dual-mass flywheel to the injection system or turbocharger. If you do not want unnecessary expenses, give up the DSG gearbox. True, the 6-speed is durable. What about petrol lovers? Honestly, it is difficult to recommend anything. The 1.8 TSI engine, optimal in every respect, is, despite its year, oil guzzling if it has not been repaired. The same applies to the powerful 2.0 TSI unit. Another thing is that the engine can be repaired and then enjoy the ride. It seems like a lot, but you have to remember that after a successful procedure, we already have an engine free of defects, but with many advantages, good dynamics, and fuel consumption. This is an option that is really worth considering. If you go down this route, buying a Passat 1.8 TSI or 2.0 TSI may be a better decision than the 2.0 TDI. What about the 1.4 TSI? The smaller petrol belongs to the EA 111 family, i.e. early units with serious problems, which mainly concern the timing drive. In more powerful versions with a dual-turbo system, one must reckon not only with turbocharger and compressor failures, but also with the possibility of destroying the pistons. All this sounds uninteresting, but the costs of potential repairs are no higher than in the case of the 1.8 TSI engine. I see the problem rather in the durability of the small engine, which works well for the first 150 to 200,000 kilometers and then shows signs of fatigue. The safest choice is the weakest petrol 1.4 TSI with 122 horsepower, except that it is the most loaded engine. There is still a very rare version of the 3.6 VR6. This engine is a development of the older design and has been equipped with direct injection, which does not really allow it to be gassed. The advantages are, of course, the sound, power, performance, and very rich equipment, 4-motion drive, automatic, often most options, while the disadvantage is the maintenance costs. It is not only a fuel-guzzling engine, it has a not very durable timing drive, and it also has numerous problems with the control electronics. If you care about high power and good performance, it is worth buying the 2.0 TSI version, having it overhauled and then tuned. Although I think that when you realize that we are talking about the Passat, this last sentence makes no sense, just like choosing the 3.6 version. What goes wrong in the Passat B7? The main advantage of this generation of Passat is the significantly improved quality of what was already done in the B6 model. The electrics are more stable and are not plagued by trivial faults, warning lights coming on, a jammed parking brake. Unfortunately, one may get the impression that the quality of external elements, such as steaming lamps, lighting faults, traces of corrosion, undurable paintwork, has not been improved. You can't complain about the suspension system, and its servicing is not expensive if you don't have to replace adaptive shock absorbers. You will also pay that much for good quality replacements without variable damping force. The same applies to well-equipped cars with safety systems. For example, replacing the headlights or windshield will be more expensive due to the sensors and control devices than in the basic version. Thank you for listening to me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate my video. If you know of any problems with this car that I haven't mentioned, be sure to write about them in the comments.